Hey everybody, how's it going? Welcome to the show. Hope you guys have saved some room in that gas tank because it's time to go one more round with Rob. Guys, this is episode number 10 for us. So this is, it's not a lot of episodes that we've put out so far, but this is definitely something that I think is special. And with that, today's episode is going to be a little bit different than normal. So I'm not breaking down any fights for you guys today, but I am going to break down one of the rules that has come into play the last 2 weeks with the UFC. So the rule that I'm going to be looking at for you guys and kind of breaking down for you guys today is the knee to the head of a grounded opponent rule. Like I said, this is in the last 2 weeks. This has been a big topic as far as the UFC goes. We've had 2 fights in the last 2 weeks end by a legal knee to a grounded opponent. So I think today is kind of a good day to talk about this topic. So just to get into the rule for you guys, for some people that may not know it or understand it, the rule of you becoming, or a fighter becoming, a grounded opponent would be if anything other than the soles of the fighter's feet are in contact with the ground. So that's meaning they have either one knee down or both knees down. They are immediately a grounded opponent. If one or both fighters are completely on the ground, so they're in kind of a grappling exchange on the ground, they're obviously a grounded opponent. Cannot knee them to the head. Now, here's where things get a little tricky with some fighters in some states. Under the new unified rules of mixed martial arts, both hands in either a fist or can be flat palm of a fighter have to be in contact with the mat when the knee lands for that, and that person is still standing. That is, they're still standing, maybe in like a clinch or something up against the cage or whatever, or even out in the open of the octagon there or the cage. If a person's fists or palms of their hands or any portion of their hands, if both of them, so both hands, palms, fingers, fists, whatever it is, if they're touching the mat, they are considered a grounded opponent. Now, under the old unified rules of MMA, that only had to be the case for one hand. So if one hand was in a fist or a palm or their fingertips were touching the ground, they were a grounded opponent. Now, I said when I brought up those two, the old and the new unified rules, I said this is where it gets tricky. And it gets tricky because as far as I understand, only some states have adopted these new unified rules, which I don't know why they're new unified rules if every state isn't doing them. I don't have an answer for you guys on that one. I think me personally, I think if they're going to call them the unified rules of mixed martial arts, every state commission should be in on this, and every state commission should vote yes on it. And quite frankly, I think they should vote yes on the new unified rules because I think it's a better rule set for the current landscape of mixed martial arts as it is. So only some states have adopted those new unified rules. Other states are still using the older set of unified rules. And there are some states that use like a hybrid of the new and old set of rules, which a majority of the time, though that hybrid set of rules, really the only rule difference, or the only rule that they're carrying over from the older set of unified rules, is that one hand down to equal a grounded opponent. And then the rest of it kind of uses the new unified rules. At least that's the big one that is always kind of made note of. So I'm assuming that would lead me to believe that the rest of the rules are under the new unified rules and just that old rule gets carried over. Which actually that's the case in Nevada, which is where these last 2 fight cards have occurred for the UFC, which is where these last 2 incidents have occurred. And like I said, in both weeks, it was the Aljamain Sterling Petr Yan fight for the UFC bantamweight title 2 weeks ago, and then this past Saturday, it occurred in the Eric Anders. Oh shoot, I'm sorry guys, I'm drawing a blank here. Darren Stewart. There it is. The Eric Anders Darren Stewart fight. Now, I do want to point this out. Like I said before, if either under the new or old rules, if a person, so if under the old rules they have their one hand down on the mat, whether it's fist, fingertips, palm, whatever, or under the new rules, if it's two hands, same thing, fist, palms, fingertips, whatever. If as an opponent, as a offensive fighter, we'll say in that situation, if I am throwing a knee and I lift you up and your hands come off the mat and then my knee lands, that's a legal knee. That's completely legal. It is okay. Your hands were no longer in contact with the mat. You are therefore no longer a grounded opponent. So I just want to make that clear. So I know there are times where guys have had their opponent in a situation, and their opponent has had either the one hand or two hands down to make themselves a grounded fighter based on whatever rule set they're in. If I lift you up and my knee lands after I've lifted your hands off the mat, that's fair game. That's completely legal, and that's considered fair game. Now, like I said before, I think the newer unified rules are a lot better than the older unified rules, especially in this case of the grounded opponent rule, at least in terms of having, needing both hands to be down to be considered a grounded opponent. And here's why I say that. So under the old rule, fighters would so-called play the game, so to speak. And what I mean by that is that when they would be clinched with an opponent, a lot of times it was up against the cage and they were kind of hunched over, similar to an Eric Anders, Darren Stewart situation when that fight was ended. Not in that exact situation, because in that situation, Darren Stewart, under the new or old rules, would have been a grounded opponent. He had one knee down, so that's anything other than the soles of his feet, and he's not hunched over. He's not the soles of his feet on the ground still. He was on one knee. What I'm talking about is they're clinching up against the cage, and one guy is kind of hunched over. He's hunched over. He or she is hunched over, and they are trying to defend getting kneed to the head. Now, I also want to point out, if you knee a person in the body here, that's completely legal as well. So a lot of times what guys would do is they would try to mix up knees to the body and then go a knee to the head and try to catch the guy off guard there. So when the fighters were playing the game, they were, they're clinched and hunched over. They're getting kneed to the body, and then they would kind of watch their opponent to see if they were going to throw a knee to the head. And as soon as they saw them trying to start the technique to throw the knee to the head, they would put a hand down. Like I said, these are under the old rules, so they would only need one hand down. So they would put one hand down, and that would make them either be fingertips, fist, palm, whatever. They would just put one hand down. They would get kneed in the head. That would make an illegal technique. They would get the break. They would get the time to recover and everything like that. And it just wasn't the greatest. I don't know how else to put it. I don't want to say it was terrible, because I want to say it wasn't the most common thing to happen, but you could tell when guys were trying to do it, and the way that fighters started to get around that is they would be like, okay, great. Well, I know you're going to try to put your hand down, so when I go to throw my knee, I'm just going to lift you up a little bit, and then you can't reach the ground. So fighters were able to adapt to it, but it was still, it was, and I mean no disrespect by this next statement to any fighter, but it was almost like a cheap trick. It was almost like a cheap trick. It was almost getting away with cheating, honestly. I'll go as far as to say that it was almost getting away with cheating, because you were making your opponent break a rule that they had no intention of breaking. You were just doing it so that you didn't take that damage. Now, I know some people will be like, Rob, that's not cheating. That's just, that's knowing the rule set and using it to your advantage. which, yes, I can see that. I can see that, and I can, understand that viewpoint. But you're a fighter. If you don't expect to get hit, or if you're not making a attempt to get out of a situation that is not advantageous to you, sorry, but you deserve to get hit then. Like, I don't know how else to put it. Like, if you're not trying to evade where I'm putting you, I'm just going to hit you then, because that's what I have to do. Like, that's my job. That's your job too. You're just not doing anything about it. So why am I going to not do my job? If I don't win this fight, I don't get paid, or at least I don't get half of my pay, which different subject for a different video. We'll probably cover that as well. But, so it was almost cheating in a way. Now, there were referees that caught on to this. Herb Dean had a I want to say famous interaction with a fighter at one point during a fight. I say famous because I remember it because I was watching it live and I was like, oh, way to go, Herb. And that was kind of the first time that I ever thought, like, oh, that rule might be really dumb. I forget who the two fighters were. Doesn't really matter. Herb Dean was refereeing. And the one guy, I believe it was a situation like I just kind of explained. He was up against the cage. He was hunched over. The guy was kneeing him to the body, and then he would go to throw a knee to the head, and his opponent would just drop a hand down to try to make it illegal. Well, Herb Dean caught on to this, and it was in the middle of a fight, and Herb Dean saw what he was doing. And so the guy got kneed once, and Herb didn't really, in the head, that is, once while his hand was on the ground, because he put it there as the guy was throwing it. And Herb Dean didn't really say anything. And then the guy throws a couple knees to the body, I believe, throws another knee to the head, where the guy, again, puts one hand down to make him a grounded opponent under the old rules, because that's what they were using then. Gets knee to the head, which is technically at that point illegal. And I think the guy either made a motion to Herb or he said something to Herb really quickly. And Herb Dean just responded. He was like, hey, man, you're playing the game. I'm not going to call that. Which I thought was amazing. I thought it was a big, and I think that's that was a big step forward into what could have potentially started the snowball to lead to this new rule under the unified rules, where you have to have both hands down to become a grounded opponent. So that new rule doesn't make it as easy for guys to become that grounded opponent so quickly, because you have to put both hands down on the mat. Now, if you're putting both hands down on the mat, I can easily drive you to the ground, and now you're in a worse situation, essentially, because now, like I said, a lot of the times these happen up against the cage. So now I've driven you to the ground. I'm on top control. You're up against the cage. So you really only have two options of the way to get out. You can either try to go forward or you can try to go backwards. But either way, I'm still over top of you, and I can easily shift my weight too. So it doesn't make it as easy for you to get out. So I think the rule change was a great one. I think it was amazing. I do think, though, that at this point in the game, there are rules that just need to be done away with. Now, I really encourage you guys to go and watch at least the segment from Joe Rogan's podcast. It was, I want to say, maybe a year or two ago. He had John McCarthy on, who was one of the original referees. He has reffed in the UFC and MMA since UFC 2. Okay, so way back in 1993, maybe UFC 2 might have been 1994. I believe UFC 2 might have been 1994. UFC 1 was definitely 93. So I think UFC 2 was 94. Either way, the man has been around forever, and he was actually involved in the first UFC. I think he was some type of how you want to say it, advisor, there it is, to the ref that did UFC 1, and I think he just I don't think he cared for the way that the ref from UFC 1 did everything 100%. So he said, hey, I'll take over at UFC 2. And the man is arguably the greatest MMA ref ever. Has he had his mistakes? Yeah, but in my opinion, those are few and far between. So I encourage you guys to go back and watch that episode, or at least the clip where he talks about how the MMA rules kind of came together. It was very eye-opening for me. I had never known that before, and I still watch it every now and again to this day, because there are things that he explains in a way that's just like, oh, that's what that rule is supposed to mean. Now, to get to back to the knees to a grounded opponent rule, I honestly think it's kind of outdated. And I know this is probably going to be the point in the video where a lot of you guys are like, whoa, Rob, what are you talking about? You really think these guys should be able to knee these guys to the head while, he's laying on his back? Yeah, I do, honestly. And it's not because I don't care about their health, but I don't think the arguments against it are strong enough to hold up with some of the things that I have, seen from other organizations, and things that I have a good grasp of the knowledge of from both my martial arts background and my sports medicine background. Like I said, having that sports medicine background, I 100% want their health to be, as close to 100% safe as possible. But I also understand that these guys are, they're cage fighters. They're prize fighters. They get paid to fight. They get paid to be violent against another human being. So, here's the thing. The reason I think that the grounded opponent rule, or knees to the head of a grounded opponent rule, is outdated is this. You can have a tie clinch on a guy while you're standing. So that's a tie clinch, for some people that don't know, is where I would have you clinch. My hands would be kind of locked like this behind your head or neck. And I can pull you down while I throw my knee into your face. So not only are you going to get hit with the force of my knee coming up, you're then getting hit with the force of your head being pulled down by both gravity and myself. So I'm pulling you and bringing, that's a lot of torque coming up from my body. Plus you add in the gravity there. I don't see a way that can be deemed okay, because you're getting, like I said, you're getting hit with a lot of force. But me being on the ground and just throwing a knee with really just the weight of my leg is worse than that. I don't see how that argument can hold up. Because if I'm on the ground with you, there's no force of gravity. I can pull you a little bit, but it's nowhere near the amount that I can kind of pull on you with a tie clinch. And I'm not getting the same amount of torque, if any torque, with my hips and with my body as I am as I'm standing. And so you take those three calculations or three factors into account, and I just don't see how you can say that knee on the ground is worse than the knee that I can throw standing up, holding onto the guy's head and pulling it into my knee. I don't see it. I don't see how that math can add up. The other thing is other organizations are not using this rule. The most notable, in my opinion, is ONE FC over in Asia, One Fighting Championships over in Asia. And as far as I'm concerned, they haven't had any reported issues with that rule. It's also, I don't see a lot of guys throwing it anyway. There's not a lot of situations that I see in their MMA fights that guys are throwing knees to the head, because if you're going to throw a knee to the head, you then have to lift your one leg off the ground, which then puts you essentially on, 3 points instead of 4. And it becomes a little bit easier for you to get swept if the guy knows what he's doing on the ground. So it's not like I'm going to be able to Now, I'm sure there are going to be some situations and some people where they can hold the position and just throw really quick knees and get the fight to end. But what's the difference between throwing the knee and throwing an elbow back this way, or throwing the elbow straight down and hitting them with the point of the elbow? Point of the elbow is one of the hardest points of the body. And the point of the elbow causes a tremendous amount of cuts. I mean, you look at Tony Ferguson's fights, that's what he does. He takes his elbows and he just, whether he's on the bottom or on the top, standing, the man could be floating upside down. In the middle of the octagon, and he's throwing elbows, and he's just so good, and he's lanky, and he's not overly bulky. So the point of his elbow just kind of sticks out, and he just slices guys up with them. I don't know how that you can argue that slicing somebody's skull open is better than just kind of getting a knee to the head. Like I said, with really no torque on it. Like, I can posture up a little bit and drop an elbow with a ton of torque from my body. I can't really do that on the ground with a knee. So now I'm also not saying that I think that in like the situation of an Aljamain Sterling Petr Yan fight, where Sterling is clearly there, and he's got both knees down, he's kind of hunched over. I'm kind of back and forth on that one. So that I'll be completely honest with you guys. I don't really know how I feel about that. I will say this, in the argument for being able to knee in that position would be, well, Aljamain at that point was pretty much just stalling. He knew Petr Yan couldn't knee him, and he was doing enough with his upper body to kind of dodge a good portion of his punches. So he's really just stalling at that point. And in no other combat sport or no other sport in general are you awarded points for, well, I don't want to say no other sport in general, because there are some sports where you can technically stall. But in no other combat sport are you allowed to stall your opponent in any way without getting a warning, a point against you, anything like that. Like, if you look at boxing and guys just kind of move around and run around the ring, they get a warning. They get a warning. The ref says, hey, you got to engage. You got to engage, or I'm going to take a point. Or in some cases, the ref's like, hey, you got to engage, or I'm going to stop the fight. So in either of those situations, it's still, you're still getting you're getting some type of action posed against you by the official because you're stalling. In wrestling, if you stall, you get a warning. I believe you get 2 warnings in some cases. And then you start getting points awarded to the other guy because you're stalling. So, in that situation, it's like, hey, well, he's stalling. Like, why is he not being, why is he not being penalized for it? Now, and I do get it. It should be like, well, the other guy should start being more offensive. But if I'm winning the fight, why am I going to put myself in a position where if I open up offensively, the other guy could have a lucky shot and my night could be finished. I could get finished. My night could be over, and in that case, I lose my championship. So I think that aspect of the rule needs to be really looked at, and I think, honestly, I think we should have some type of sports medicine university or sports medicine program at a university look at it and see what the danger is, if any, and what kind of forces can be applied there by the offensive guy or girl, and if they're any different than a standing tie clinch. Because if it's the same as a standing tie clinch, I think the rule should just get rid of it. If it's worse than a standing tie clinch, okay, yeah, maybe we keep that portion of the round or of the rule around. And I think we should do the same for the guy when both guys or girls are on the ground, they're grappling, and somebody is throwing a knee to the head of the other person. I think we should look at those numbers as well and say, hey, are they any worse, the same, or are they better? Meaning they have less force applied, less force coming from them than if the person is in a standing tie clinch. Because again, I think if it's the same or better than a standing tie clinch, the amount of force that's produced during a standing tie clinch during a knee, I think we should just get rid of the rule. If it's worse than that, yeah, okay, then we can, again, have a discussion, keep the rule around. But like I said before, I don't think being on the ground like that, I don't think you're going to be able to see, I don't think the numbers are going to reflect that it is any worse than having somebody throw a knee in a standing tie clinch. From the physics of it, from the anatomical portion of it, I just don't think that it is. I don't see how it would be worse than a standing tie clinch, a knee thrown by a standing tie clinch. So, I want to kind of also make note of this. I understand why here in the U.S. this rule may never get to where ONE FC has it. But I think the biggest reason is because of optics. I think this rule is because of optics. And there are a couple of rules that are because of optics, and they're around because of optics. Like I said, if you guys go and watch that video of John McCarthy on the Joe Rogan show, on Joe Rogan's podcast, you'll see what I'm saying. There's one rule specifically that I will probably cover in another video as well, that the one doctor that was on the conference call with the group that was making the rules, there's one rule in particular where he said, he's like, I can't have that technique because I've seen it in, this setting, and this setting, and that's just way too dangerous. And, at the time, one of the owners of the UFC, John McCarthy, tried to argue it. I would encourage you guys to go and listen to it from his words and his experience, because he was actually there. But, he tries to go to argue it, and the one owner just says, forget it, we'll argue it later, it's stupid anyway. But we've never gotten back to that rule. Anyway, like I said, I'll get to that in another video probably. But the biggest thing of why we don't have knees to the head of a grounded opponent is just optics. It just doesn't look great to have a fighter or fighters kneeing each other in the head while they're on the ground. But like I said, that's just optics. It's just optics. It's just like, oh, that doesn't look great. But how does that not look great? But seeing somebody get elbowed in the face, you're like, it's okay. We're good with that. I don't understand it. I don't. And like I've said, I have a combat sports background. I have a martial arts background. I've been punched in the face. I've been kicked in the face. I've been elbowed. I've been kneed. Is it great? No, it sucks. Luckily, I haven't had anything majorly done to, my face or my body, knock on wood. And I don't think a lot of people do. Obviously the guys that and girls that fight in MMA and boxing, yes, at some point that's probably going to happen. The chances of it not happening are probably slim to none. I mean, I'm just saying that. I haven't looked at any of the data. I haven't looked at any of the numbers. But when you use common sense, you're like, yeah, you're getting punched and kicked in the face for a living. Like, it's probably going to happen at some point in your career. And I'm not saying it's a bad thing. It's just part of the sport. And guys break their noses in baseball. They break their noses in basketball, football, soccer. I'm sure in volleyball and badminton it's happened because of freak things. It happens in sports. But I think we need to look at the sports individually. And the optics argument that it just doesn't look good for having fighters knee each other in the head while they're on the ground, I don't think is a strong enough argument to make. Like I said before, I don't think the physics would support the safety argument of, it's not safe for them to get kneed in the head on the ground. I don't think that's true. Like I said, I think I would love to see a university do a study on it and see, where the knees on the ground compare as to like a standing tie clinch knee thrown. And I would, like I said, I would love to see the numbers there, because I don't think, again, knowing what I remember from physics class and anatomy class and the anatomy physiology stuff, I don't think the force that you can create pulling a person's head down with gravity assisting you while torquing and throwing your knee into their face is going to be is going to produce less force than me simply just trying to use my leg to knee them on the ground and not be able to pull them or use as much torque to pull them into the knee as possible. Also, I'm not going to have the assistance of gravity either. So that force gets taken out completely there. So like I said, I just don't think that that's going to, I don't think it would equate. I don't think it would come out, I'm not saying this rule should be, thrown out of the rule book immediately, like right now. And, starting Saturday, everybody should be able to knee their opponent in the head. I'm not saying that. But what I am saying is I think that rule needs to be seriously looked at. And I think it's time to look at all of the rules in MMA a lot more in depth and say, hey, what do we know now that we didn't know 20 years ago when these rules were made? And what can we change? I think it's time for that conversation. Honestly, I think it's way past that time for that conversation. And again, there's going to be other rules that I probably cover for you guys on the show. And, I'll probably get into those as well. But that's kind of my take on the knee to the head of a grounded opponent rule. I just think they need to look at it. And I think it needs a really in-depth look at it. And we need to figure out if it's actually necessary to have anymore. But that's up for the commissions. That's up for the state commissions. That's up for people, way above my pay grade to decide. I'm just, a retired martial artist and combat sport fan that's talking on his own computer. So whether or not they see this and they like my opinion or take my advice, I don't know. But that's my take on it. What do you guys think? Let me know. Drop a comment down below. Like, share, subscribe here on YouTube, all that kind of stuff. Again, head over to Facebook and Instagram. The Facebook page is One More Round with Rob. On Instagram, the Instagram handle is One More Round Rob. I'm posting there every day, giving you guys updates on the MMA and boxing world, letting you guys know what fight cards and what fights I'm going to be breaking down for you guys, all that kind of stuff. So head on over, check those guys out, like and follow those. If you guys have any fight cards coming up that you haven't heard me talking about or don't see me talking about on Facebook or Instagram, let me know. I'll take a look. Maybe I'll break them down for you guys. And then other than that, stay happy, healthy, and safe. Congratulations. You just went one more round with Rob. We'll see you guys next time. Have a good one.